We already lost our collective memory of the 2000 presidential election, where we didn't know the results of the election for 5 weeks. This year, counting ballots will likely take longer than usual due to the increased reliance on mail ballots. This is particularly true in states that do not begin processing mail ballots until Election Day or even after polling places close on election night. There also may be litigation stemming from vote counting. So Americans need to start getting prepared right now for the very real likelihood that the presidential election results will not be known on November 3rd. In fact, it may be many days before results are announced. Another wrinkle is the fact that the presidential candidate who leads the vote count may not be the eventual winner after all the votes are counted. There may be even a dramatic, legitimate shift in vote tallies along the way. Thankfully, polling shows that more and more Americans understand the need for patience this year, but they still have that very familiar itch for quick results, especially with nonstop media coverage. Yet there's another worry. What happens if neither presidential candidate wins this election in a landslide and key battleground states are still counting their ballots, but a candidate claims victory prematurely? This is a real possibility. Yet some politicians incorrectly claim there is something inherently wrong with ballots being counted after election night. Compounding matters, what happens if bad actors spread dangerous conspiracy theories to create public confusion and challenge election results? And what if that disinformation ricochets around the internet on popular sites like Facebook and Twitter? It could be a dangerous mess, a mess that is bad for democracy, a mess that could threaten the legitimacy of the next president. Thankfully, there are ways to avoid this solution, and today we want to explore them. We want to discuss the possibilities, the responsibilities owed by government officials, members of media, and technology platforms. How can we collectively set realistic expectations for now for members of the public about when election results will be finalized? How can we ensure that there is necessary transparency in the reporting of election results so that people trust the system? And how can we prepare to push back against false claims of election cheating or vote tampering? Ultimately, this is all about setting public expectations now for when election results will be realistically finalized, accurately conveying that prolonged ballot counting periods are normal, legitimate, and necessary to ensure every voter's voice is heard, will provide vital in maintaining public faith in the democratic process. Now, I'm very pleased to introduce our esteemed panelists for today. First, we are thrilled to have with us Ben Hovland, the chairman of the U.S. Election Assistance Commission. The EAC is an independent, bipartisan commission that sits at the epicenter of helping ensure that elections are run in a safe, secure, and accessible manner. Our next panelist is Amanda Turkle, the Washington bureau chief of the major news site HuffPost, a site that I know many of us visit several times a day. Amanda continually sets the standard for hard-hitting news and analysis, including on all things political. I will also say that we are proud that Amanda is an alum of the Center for American Progress, and I had the pleasure of working with her many, many moons ago. We are also joined by my colleague, Adam Connor, who is CAP's Vice President for Technology Policy, a team that he helped create recently. Adam has deep experience and expertise in the world of technology policy, including prior stints at some of the nation's leading online platforms. And we will be joined a little later on by Jocelyn Benson, the Secretary of State for the great state of Michigan. She'll be joining us in progress due to a last-minute change in her schedule. And we have hosted Secretary Benson at CAP before, and we are grateful that she will return to offer her always valuable insights. She oversees elections in Michigan, where she has been at the forefront of fighting for voting accessibility during the pandemic. As a reminder, this event offers closed captioning, and you can view it again afterwards by visiting our website on the events section. Later on in our program, I will be taking questions from our audience, and you can submit your questions in the chat section. And feel free to follow the conversation along on Twitter using the hashtag #ElectionNightExpectations. So without further delay, let's start our discussion. Chairman Hovland, we are so excited to have you with us during this incredibly busy time. So most Americans consider election night to be the de facto deadline for knowing who wins and who loses. But actually, states have laws giving officials days or even weeks to finalize results. Can you talk a little more about this and the difference between preliminary results announced on election night and results that have to be officially certified?
Thanks, Daniela. It is great to be here, and you're absolutely right. Election night results are always unofficial, and as you said, state law dictates the timeline for that final canvass and certification process. And really, when you think about how elections are run, that makes sense. The 50 states run elections. Each one runs their elections in their own unique way. And we have differences in that election administration that makes a difference in the timelines for finalizing the vote count. Some of the things that we've heard more people talk about this year, the volume of mail ballots we're going to see. Most states fall into one of two categories. Essentially, are you a received by election day state? Is that your standard on mail ballots? Or are you a postmark standard, meaning that usually it's postmarked on election day. There's a couple that are postmarked the day before election day. Again, everybody does it a little different, but that's a big distinction. And then if you're a postmark standard, what is your cutoff for receiving that? We know it's a few days after the election. I believe California extended their timeline out to 17 days after the election. And so that factors in. Also, as you mentioned in your opening, when are they allowed to start processing ballots? And that means not just counting, but verifying signatures, opening envelopes. That is a process, particularly with an increased volume and with more jurisdictions having more mail. I think we're going to set records across the board in mail and absentee ballots this year. And so you'll have places that maybe don't have the infrastructure, this automated sorting equipment, the automated envelope slicers, et cetera, to necessarily process that as quickly. And finally, one other piece I would add that impacts the timeline are provisional ballots. Again, different states use those in different ways. Some states use that as essentially a change of address form, and so they have higher numbers of provisionals. Those all have to be sorted out. And so as you look at the numbers, when elections are traditionally called, that is a media function, at least what we're accustomed to on election night. And so this year, there are more options for more ballots to be outstanding, if you will. And so again, I think the important things for people to remember are these processes, the canvass and certification process, the counting process, those are normal and happen every year. That's election officials doing what they do. The difference this year is really more about what we're able to call on election night. Again, there's a lot of that instant gratification that people want. There's a lot of variables that go into it, but you're exactly right that it's going to be smart for people to be patient this year. And again, important to know that it's only the official results are usually not certified for days or weeks after the election.
So let's talk about the media, Amanda. There are numerous examples of political races being called well after election night, as I mentioned, including some presidential races. What happens to public faith in a democratic process when the media or candidates jump the gun to announce a winner and are later forced to walk back their statements once every ballot is canceled or counted, sorry?
Yeah, I mean, it's not good. So in 2000, the media declared that Bush had won the election, and they had to walk that back. And at a little after 3 a.m. on November 8th, Tom Brokaw went on TV and said, "We don't have egg on our face; we have omelet all over our suits." And it was hugely embarrassing for the media, obviously. And this, every time the media, we don't like getting things wrong. We don't like having corrections, and there are small corrections, obviously. For the other example, the other day we had a correction. Instead of referring to the White House advisor Judd Deere, someone referred to him as John Deere, the tractor company. That was a smaller one. There are bigger ones, though. I remember after the Supreme Court upheld the Affordable Care Act, CNN, though, went on TV and said that it was struck down. And the fact that I remembered that and could pull that from memory shows you that it was a fairly significant error. And then you have, in addition to calling races wrong, you have things like the Iraq War, where much of the mainstream media screwed it up and screwed up the facts and sort of accepted facts that weren't actually facts. And from that, you had this whole distrust in the media that it took years and years for the media to regain. And not only did you have distrust, but you had this whole alternative media scene pop up. You had, liberal blogs, the blogosphere, online news, which is all where I got my start and where I continue to work today. And that was because we felt that the traditional media wasn't doing a good enough job in what they were supposed to be doing. And so these can have huge ramifications. Obviously, again, there are small errors and then there are real errors. And you have people like the president who take anything and use it as a conspiracy theory. He uses every small error, and even things, honestly, that aren't errors, just stories that he doesn't like. He calls them fake news. But there's enough there that he uses it to sort of feed the machine, to fuel conspiracy theories. And he has enough to point to that he can say, this shows that the media is corrupt. They don't know what they're doing and they're out to get me. And he is absolutely going to be trying to do that with the election results. He's already doing it. He is already saying that if the winner is not known on election night, if it takes days, if it takes weeks, it means it's all fake, it's all corrupt, and you can't trust the results. And even if, Trump, say, does accept the results, he's going to use this to his advantage once he's out of office to keep up this sort of machine that he's built, this conspiracy world that fuels, him, his empire, this sort of right-wing media that is, very, very potent online and in social media, which I'm sure Adam will talk about more. But, it does erode trust. And I think that, the media has quite, a bit of a job as do pundits and, officials to educate the public this time that, what Trump says is wrong. Just because it looks like maybe Trump is winning on election night, that could change over the next few days or weeks. And that doesn't mean that there are all these election officials trying to rig the election against Trump. It just means that that's how people voted and that's how the votes are coming in. There's a poll, a Gallup Knight Foundation poll taken this year that found people view the news media as critical, but Americans view inaccuracies as intentional. 54% say that it's the media misrepresenting the facts. 28% believe that the media is simply making things up. And that can be very hard to combat now with social media when you see on Facebook, your high school friend who you thought was the smartest kid in the class posting some, fake coronavirus video. And it's like, I don't know, maybe, CNN saying something, but maybe I should be listening to this kid because he always knew what he was talking about. So yeah, the media, I think we've been having a lot of discussions and trying to make sure that we try to educate the public as much as possible and create this echo chamber, setting expectations that things may not be fast this election night.
So let's talk about social media. Adam, social media platforms have been guilty of amplifying disinformation about election results in past cycles. And since 2016, these platforms have been grappling with how to deal with political misinformation and have recently announced policy changes they say will help prevent false information from spreading on election night. What do you think about the policy changes they've put in? But B, what are 3 steps and policies that you think social media platforms need to take or enact over the next 3 weeks in order to minimize the spread and the impact of misinformation about the election, not just on election day, but leading up to it?
It's, I think, a great question. And I think some of the changes that are announced as recently as Friday from Twitter and others they're a start, but I think they're just a start. And I think, the number one thing you have to do in a case like this is be prepared. And I think that a lot of the preparation has really gone into the impact of voting or election day. And there's been a lot less attention and thought given to the kind of dynamics of a post-election period. Once the polls close, things really shift. And so I think the kind of first piece of advice is to really dig deep and say, a post-election period is not just one kind of phase, it's multiple different iterations. While we're counting the votes, there's kind of unofficial declarations from either the media or election officials on, in the days coming, around what happened in races. There's official certification, which may take weeks, or recounts, and then obviously in the US presidential sense, there's also the electoral college. And all of those are very complicated niche subjects where you need to think ahead of time about what are the potential disruptions? What do we need to prepare for? What substance matter experts do we need to find ahead of time and get on staff? So I think the first step is preparing and thinking about post-election, not as one kind of time and space, but multiple entities with different rules. I think the second for the platforms has been social media has really focused, I think, too much criticism from folks, including myself, about non-intervention. So they have been very clear that they will leave up content that might violate their rules if it comes from politicians or elected officials, because they think it's in the voters' interest for them to have maximum amount of information, even if it's possible that information can be misleading. And, I think that is a value calculus that when a citizen can still cast a vote, has an argument to be made, even if I disagree with it. But, the moment the polls close, voters can no longer vote. And so the calculus really needs to shift from not necessarily influencing a potential voter to what a platform can be used for. And I think there's a real threat this year, and I think not just in this country, but in other countries as they have elections after the polls close, around the potential for violence over results or using these platforms for delegitimization of a valid process. And so I think it's really important for platforms to shift some of their previous policies or product changes from hands off to we're here to protect the legitimacy of a vote if it is legitimate, or allow kind of people to protest if it's not. But that's a different calculus than just letting a voter have all the information that they may need in order to cast their vote, their kind of action they can take. And then I think the third thing is, it's not just about policies, it's also about product changes. These products, the algorithms and other pieces that accelerate information are really things that can really spiral out of control quickly, as we've seen during the COVID-19 crisis. And so preemptively deciding to turn off some of these features, as Twitter has, or strengthen these kind of physical interfaces that people have to click through or read in order to get information, I think is really something that more platforms should consider doing and following Twitter's lead, because I think it's clear that they tend to get overwhelmed by the products themselves working as they're supposed to. And I think the last thing I'll just say briefly is that the election officials and news media also needs to think about how what they put out can be misused on social media. So I think back to an election I worked in 2018, a congressional race where the election was won in absentee ballots, but you could see in news media and from what the county clerk was reporting that all precincts had been counted, but that wasn't taking into account absentee ballots or the total number of ballots that were outstanding that obviously ended up deciding the election. So I think it is important for the media and for election officials to think, well, what information are we putting out there that maybe we've always done, but has a real potential for harm if it is just screenshotted and put out in social media without context. And so I think number of precincts kind of reporting or counted is a really good example of a number that makes a lot less sense with the surge in both absentee ballots and other things. And so I think it's incumbent on election officials and the media to also look at what they're going to be putting out there and really red team and make sure that what they're going to put out there isn't also going to be a vector that gets stolen and used for disinformation.
That's a really good point. I'm just thinking about Steve Kornacki on MSNBC at his board when he goes down to the county and he's talking about the percentages that are reporting. Like, I wonder what he is going to do on election night. It's a very good point. And Chairman Hovland, state and local election officials often look to the EAC for guidance on handling difficult election problems. Can you talk about what preparations you've seen to address the many challenges jurisdictions face this year?
Yeah, thanks. This has been an unprecedented year. I think back to the quaint days of January, where we were just expecting potential record turnout in a presidential election year, and the potential for foreign adversaries influencing the election. And obviously, with the pandemic, that resulted in a lot of challenges. It's really been great to see firsthand the election community come together. In some of the early days in March, some of the critical infrastructure governance entities brought together a working group, brought together a bunch of documents that talked about ramping up increase in mail-in absentee ballots. You saw a lot of assistance coming from the traditional vote-by-mail states, jurisdictions that had had the luxury of time, who had ramped up their vote-by-mail programs over years or decades, providing information for their colleagues across the country, helping to convey that. The reality is The job of being an election official, election officials are contingency planners, but usually it is regionalized. It's a natural disaster, a hurricane, a wildfire, something like that. Obviously, this year with the national scale, it has been something very different. But again, we've really seen folks step up, again, identifying ways to make, to adapt first and foremost to the increase in vote by mail or absentee balloting. As I mentioned earlier, we'll set records for that this year. I think sometimes it gets a little taken out of context. In 2016, about a quarter of Americans voted by mail. My guess is we get close to about half this year, around 50%, give or take a little. But again, it is something that people have experience with. The volume is just higher. And then when we talk about polling places, you've seen election officials step up, figure out how to make them as safe as possible for voters with PPE, personal protective equipment, social distancing. You've seen some of the, some sports teams step up and provide arenas that allow for more socially distanced polling places. Obviously, we're already seeing with early voting in a number of places, some of those lines, which again, people are choosing to be there on those days, which is good, but it's also because people are 6 feet apart. And we know, we've already had about 11 million people early vote. My guess is by the end of the week, we're at over 10% of the 2016 vote total, which is awesome. Again, spreading out that vote, whether it's mail or absentee, which if you want to vote that way, you better request it ASAP or get it back as soon as possible. But early in person or election day, spreading out that voting period helps reduce lines. It helps limit that congestion, and it helps election officials. So, again, there's plans in place, but to the degree that voters can help spread the vote out over all of their available options, that is also a big help as well.
Okay, thank you. Amanda, we touched on this already, but I'd love to dig a little bit deeper. Most Americans are not steeped in details about things like vote by mail processes, recount rules, or the Electoral College. Without baseline knowledge among most Americans, there's a huge risk for disinformation to spread, as we've already seen. What responsibility does the media have in educating the public and tempering expectations? And what steps do you think need to be taken by media entities between now and Election Day?
Sure. Well, I think the media has a huge responsibility, and as I think all the panelists here agree. It's obviously something I think every media organization has already been planning for. The cable networks and the Associated Press make their own calls, and so that's why you see, you see NBC say that they're calling a state for whoever, maybe at a different time than you see Fox News doing it, and that's because they all have their in-house teams that call these things, and then the Associated Press does it separately. News outlets like ours, we don't have teams that can do that, and so we rely on AP, and so that's what we're going to do this year as well. And so we've had talks with the AP about what they're doing. We are hoping that their data is going to reflect the fact that things are going to be a little bit different. AP traditionally has been more cautious. In 2000, they didn't jump the gun as much as the networks did in calling it for Bush. Adam pointed out something that has been a problem in the past with saying how many precincts are reporting their vote totals. And that isn't really that helpful when you have so many people voting by mail this year. And so I know what the AP is doing. They're doing something called expected estimated vote percentage, which is their best guess at the total in-person voting plus the mail-in vote. I think that the cable networks, they really need to resist the impulse to find clear narratives and to declare a winner. And like this goes across all media, but the networks just have to feed this beast where, they're just on TV all the time and they have to say something. And it has to be a little bit different than it was like 3 minutes ago. And, they want to keep people watching. And so, you can expect like Joe Biden looks like he's up big. Trump is doing well in these states. And they have to be careful to temper that and to say, but we don't know yet, because there are some states where they're not even counting the mail-in vote yet. I think that the media I don't know if they've done a good enough a job of this as we could have. And I think maybe that this will change too going forward, is to sort of downplay this whole idea of election night. It's just not, it's not the thing we all know and love, where you watch TV, you eat pizza, you stay up late, and you know the winner. This is going to be a long, drawn out process, and it probably will now going forward in future elections. And you have to remember, I think too, for the cable networks, being first is not the most important. Most people are not going to remember that, one network called Michigan for whichever candidate before another one. So look at, when you make calls, look at which data you're factoring in. Exit polls are something that people have always loved, and I know they've changed them over the years, but traditionally people have relied on exit polls too much, because it gives you a snapshot of some people who went to the polls that day. Again, obviously a lot of people aren't going to be going to the polls that day. And I think that, the media has been doing this, and I don't know how much it's breaking through, but I think the media has been trying to educate people about, here are various deadlines in the states. Here is why the vote could be delayed. Here is why we might not know till whichever date. Let's set expectations. Let's call out what the president is doing now as essentially trying to undermine the vote, and call it for what it is. And don't buy into the conspiracies. There's going to be an issue of, you see those maps on election night, and they change red or blue based on who's up. There is a chance that the map could be very, very, very red at the end of election night, and then change to blue. And Adam was talking about, that's something people that could sort of take a picture of or a screenshot and put up on social media and say, look, Trump was winning on election night, and now suddenly Joe Biden's winning. What's up with that? People are clearly rigging the vote for Trump. And then, the media has to look at, do we not put up those maps at all? Do we keep the maps shaded gray until a state is called, which gives the readers, maybe not enough information? And so those are all calls that, the media is looking at. I don't know if we're going to get them right this time, but there is an awareness of, we have to be a little bit more cautious, and, a lot of our job this time is educating the public about the process.
Great, thank you. Secretary Benson, I think I see that you have joined. There we are.
Hi.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Thank you so much for joining us. I will ask you a question, and we can just jump right in. First, I want to thank you for your leadership, both in Michigan and nationwide, in ensuring that elections are safe this year. As we all know, Michigan is a very important swing state, and it is also a state where ballot counting will almost certainly extend past election night. Can you talk about, why that is, why it is so important for our democracy that the ballot counting process not be rushed? And I'm also curious to know your response to the false accusations by some that ballots counted after election night are somehow proof of fraud. And thank you for joining us again.
Sure. So yeah, well, let's unpack that a little bit. Certainly we're in a place in Michigan where, like many states are seeing right now, we're expecting record-breaking turnout this fall, which is quite remarkable in the midst of a pandemic. But it's very clear people want to vote, and they're very enthusiastic about it and determined to do so. What we're also seeing is also not unique to Michigan, but millions of people are voting early, and here we are, close to 20 days prior to the day the polls close, which is November 3rd, which we now refer to as the day the polls close in this election. But here we are 20 days prior to that, and already close to 1 million citizens have voted in Michigan. Those are quite remarkable numbers. We know they're matched in many other states. So that's our reality. We're on track to have more than 3 million of our estimated 5 to 5.5 million people voting in Michigan's elections, voting early. And what that means is we're essentially then on track to manage two different elections, one on election day itself, in which people are going to the polls and turning in their ballots in their precinct and voting their ballot through the machines right then and there. And for that line of election voting, we'll see the results on election night because, as we know, the votes are counted as they're cast. For those who voted early, we hold all of those votes until 7 a.m. on election day. At that point, they begin to be tabulated, And when you take into consideration that more than half of the votes counted in Michigan's election this year will be counted beginning on election day en masse through high-speed tabulators all throughout the state and absentee counting boards, it's really close to impossible that all of that could be counted, tabulated, and methodically and securely prepared for announcement within 12 hours. And so we're estimating, based on basic math, the number of machines, number of people, and the number of hours, and the number of ballots, that it'll take us potentially till Friday at the latest to work through methodically and securely tabulating all of those ballots, because there's a lot that needs to be done to both prepare them for tabulation and then ensure that the results are an accurate tabulation. And so all of that will be happening from 7 a.m. on election day, Tuesday, until the count is done. And then we will be continually updating the public from my office with where we are in the process throughout the hours that it takes our entire state to work through those ballots. So there's really nothing more than that. It's the process working. I recognize that every minute from when the polls close till we announce our results, that does create a space for bad actors to sow seeds of doubt among the public about what is happening behind the scenes. And that's why we'll counter that misinformation with truth and transparency by simply opening up the doors and saying, this is exactly what's happening. I'm here in the Detroit Absentee Counting Board, and here's behind me hundreds of people tabulating ballots securely as we speak. So that's how we will be able to essentially ensure the public knows exactly what we're doing to secure their vote, and that then when we do announce the results, people can trust it will be an accurate reflection of the will of the people.
Thank you. And I wanted to ask you about what happened last week when the FBI charged several people who were planning to violently storm Michigan State Capitol building and kidnap Governor Gretchen Whitmer with the alleged intention of starting a civil war. How are you preparing at the state level for the possibility of election night violence? And how are you advising local election officials and poll workers to respond if they witness or encounter violent demonstrators?
I've been working closely with the Attorney General on this, and we'll be announcing some specific things this week. But the bottom line to me is to strike a balance between ensuring transparency while preventing disruption and harassment at the polls, whatever form that may take. And so we have very clear guidelines for poll watchers and how one becomes a poll watcher, what you can do when you become a poll watcher, which is simply watch the process. You can't interfere, you can't talk to voters, all the rest. And then we have very clear protocols in place for what happens if someone violates those regulations. They are ejected from the polls immediately. The bottom line is that the Attorney General and I and law enforcement at the state and local level will be working to ensure every voter is protected on election day from real intimidation, from perceived intimidation, from imagery or actions that may result in voters feeling unsafe at the polling place. We will ensure every voter is safe, is protected. And as I mentioned, we'll be announcing some specific details on that later this week.
Great, thank you. Adam, many Americans get their news from a narrow group of sources and entities, including groups that they're part of on tech platforms. Are there steps that can be taken to overcome the challenge of people only listening to a narrow set of sources who sometimes are spreading misinformation and disinformation? And what long-term steps do tech companies need to take to counteract efforts designed to undermine our democracy?
That's a great question. I think, what's unique about the election process is there is kind of a definitive source of truth. And we've seen some of the platforms in particular, I think Facebook and both Twitter have said, for instance, they intend to publicly provide some aspect of results for their users on their platform, in the kind of once the polls close. And so, you're in a unique situation here, which is, I think for the vast majority of kind of information out there, this isn't something they're traditionally pushing towards users, but in this case, that is something that they're going to provide from reputable media sources, and we hope that will at least temper this kind of small window for disinformation around the election counting process. I think long term, there's really two things that are really pretty critical here. I think one is that it needs to be less of a focus on kind of the rules around what is allowed or not allowed, and more of an emphasis on the kind of products they build that tend to emphasize information that is deceitful, information that gets clicks, information that might get a lot of attention and go viral very quickly without some sort of controls. We've proposed something called a viral circuit breaker, similar to what the stock markets have, where when something starts shooting up and trending really quickly, it gets paused to make sure that it's kind of actually accurate before it spreads, because we know that the damage is done relatively quickly with disinformation, and that any attempts to counter it never have the same reach as the initial disinformation. And then the other is just continuing to bulk up, particularly local news, which has been so hollowed out by the tech platforms and by competition, and dominance here. And in particular, when it comes to local election stories, and particularly when people are a lot in their houses during this pandemic, having local election source or local news sources that can show you what your local polling places look like, show you your local absentee boards, things like that, are really an important transparency check that we've lost with a lot of newspapers and other local news entities shutting down. So it's really going to have to be both about the products and the algorithms, but also about making sure we do more to encourage and create local and sustain local journalism so we can see local transparency.
Great, thank you. And just a reminder to please drop your questions in the Q&A chat function. And if you're following the conversation along on Twitter, please use the hashtag #ElectionNightExpectations. I do have a question from the audience, something Secretary Benson touched on for Michigan, but Commissioner Hovland, I'd like you to answer this one first. They ask, what is a reasonable time range following Election Day for people to expect accurate election results to be reported by the media and to be officially certified by relevant state and federal authorities? I know that might be a very tough question to answer, but sort of given your understanding of the landscape and how many people have requested, mail-in ballots, et cetera, like, could you give a rough estimate of what you think might happen?
Yeah, and so I'd go back. Earlier I was talking about each state has it has laws, it has deadlines for the canvass and certification process, and that's going to obviously dictate the timeline for those to be official. That said, there are election night results, but it might help. It might help to answer this a little bit, to talk about what those election night results are. We've heard a lot of conversation about, some of that is exit polling traditionally. More and more states in the last, dozen years or so have stood up their own election night reporting sites that have those unofficial results. But, and I know technology's come a long way, but I'll at least tell a story. I used to work at the Missouri Secretary of State's office, and counties would feed in their totals so we could do that reporting. And the reality is, as you heard Secretary Benson say, election officials, they've got plans, they're awesome public servants, they're doing work, but election day is a long day. And so if you've started at 4 and you're waiting for a certain jurisdiction to come in at 1 in the morning, when I worked again at the Missouri Secretary of State's office, again, this was a little while ago, but we'd get results in by fax, we'd get called in, you'd be keying that in. Well, if 1800 becomes 8100, because you've been up for 20 hours and you transposed a number, that certainly could make a difference, which is, again, why you have the official process in place, where I've been saying the canvass and certification process is where election officials, dot the I's, cross the T's, and double check the math. And it really is this process that is there, that has always been there, to make sure that Americans' votes are counted, they're counted accurately, and we can have confidence in it. Again, certainly understand the desire to have that immediate gratification and those results as quickly as possible. And again, a lot of that is out of the hands of election officials and depends a lot on the math and the map. But at the end of the day, it's those official results that matter, and those official results that will count.
Great. I don't know if anyone else wants to jump in on that question. Amanda.
I think the big thing is I hear the word delay a lot, and will election results be delayed? And I think it's important that we not use that terminology as well. It's just this question of when will we be done tabulating, and there's more focus on that this year. It's going to take longer to tabulate than perhaps in the past because more people across the country are voting early. But I think I know we're also thinking about the roles that we all play, and all the participants, all the viewers here today can play in ensuring that truth leads the narrative on election night and beyond. I'm fully confident that we'll have clear results of our elections in a timely manner when the ballots are finished being tabulated. That's the bottom line. There's no delay. There's no, extra wait. There's no doomsday scenario. It's just simply election workers are going to be tabulating the ballots, and then when they're ready to be announced, they'll be announced, and we'll be being very transparent along the way. And I can say, as the co-chair of the NAS Elections Committee, the National Association of Secretaries of State, our Elections Committee, and we talk weekly, and this is top of mind for all of us. Not how can we rush through the results, or how can we, get results in on election night. Top of mind is how do we ensure an accurate tabulation of every ballot, which we've got plans to do, and then how do we know and confirm and build confidence in the public that that's exactly what we are doing. And again, I think all of us, everyone watching today, has a role to play in spreading that trusted information and ensuring we are confirming that the process is working as we wait collectively as a nation patiently for our hardworking election administrators to tabulate every ballot.
Great.
And I would just say that another date to watch, if you're looking for specific dates, is December 14th. That's when the states send their electors to Congress. Usually we ignore that. And it, by then we know the winner. But if there is an electoral college tie, if you don't reach if no one reaches the 270 votes needed, there's a faithless elector, if there's really something crazy with, state legislatures picked, their own electors, and you have governors of the opposing party picking electors. If something really goes off the rails, December 14th is a date to watch.
Thank you. I have a question for all the panelists. We've sort of touched on this a little bit. Election night will set the tone for how America proceeds with everything that comes afterwards: the recounts, electoral college, possible transitions of power. Name one thing we can all do to help ensure election night sets a good tone for the remainder of this year through inauguration in January 2021. Secretary Benson, I'll start with you.
Yeah, commit to using every platform, every network you're a part of as a means to spread trusted information and accurate information about what's happening. Those of us who lived through and closely watched the 2000 election and subsequent close elections remember how there's this massive flurry to get information and to spread information and to answer questions. And I know in the media as well, there will be an intense focus on that. The bottom line is election administrators and secretaries of state, where they serve as chief election officers, have the accurate information, listen to what we're saying, repeat what we're saying. If you want that accurate information, this is not a time for misinformation to be spread, and you all can be a part of ensuring that doesn't happen, and that essentially the tone that we set now and on election night and in the days that follow is that we will rely on and spread trusted information from election administrators and use that to guide the narrative and the discourse.
Great. Commissioner?
Thank you. I would absolutely echo Secretary Benson, and the National Association of Secretaries of State driven Trusted Info 2020 campaign this year has been great, and a big deal about getting people to that trusted source information, because we have seen such misinformation and disinformation out there, particularly on social media. But I would also say everything in elections is connected. So we're talking about election night primarily, but I can't talk about election night without talking about the lead up. And you've heard people talk about making a plan to vote, voting early. Again, talked about that and the numbers we're seeing and why we should keep seeing those numbers. And I know that most people watching this, I'm almost certain, are all registered to vote at their current address, because you're watching this panel 21 days out. But you may know people that aren't. Today is a registration deadline in Louisiana and Kansas and Oregon and New Jersey and Virginia and West Virginia, and even some of the same day states, the district, Maryland, Maine, Minnesota, they all have registration deadlines today that even though you could register on election day, doing so now, make sure you get, if you want your mail or absentee ballot to get sent to you, then you're not filling out a change of address form or a provisional in the polling place. That makes lines shorter. That makes election day better. And all of those ripples play out to what the story of election day and election night are. So again, make a plan, vote early if you can, help spread that out, and just vote.
Amanda?
I think on election night, if it's clear that we are not going to win, we should accept the election results and pledge to leave the White House and not call out militias to the streets. But if that doesn't apply to you, if that is too narrow of a we, I would say that you should, rely on facts. And it's always good to look at different news sources. Fine, look at what's going on in social media, look at what's going on in major news sites, look at what's going on in your local papers, local TV, local radio, to really see what's going on. Because we've talked a lot about, making sure votes are counted, making sure that they're timely, but also, what kind of voter suppression is going to be going on, what's going on in your polls. Is there something that you might need to, alert authorities to? So yes, hopefully facts will win out for everyone.
Great. Adam?
I think somebody I used to work with used to say, voting is kind of the minimum you should do in the process. And I think a lot of us are able to vote early and securely this year in a way we haven't maybe been able to before. And that kind of leaves a gap. What do you do after you vote? And you can commit yourself to using your social networks, other things to say, we're all voting. Many of us are voting early. That might take longer to count votes. Don't expect it. You can start doing the work now to prepare people or come into contact with the fact that just opening envelopes takes longer. Counting every vote when they're in 2 envelopes takes longer than it does in other ways. And just being very honest about the fact that, ahead of time that this is going to happen. I spend a lot of time in the field for elections as a GOTV person, and I kind of always remind my staffers that when the polls close, our work is done, but the election administrator's work is only half done, right? They've got to go now and do the actual hard work of if we've been successful, of counting even more votes. And so I think it's important to make sure that people know these are humans who are trying to do a job in a difficult circumstance, and to give them the time to do it right, because it's so important.
Great. I want to ask a question. This actually came from the audience. We've been talking a lot about how there are 50 states and they have 50 different ways of running elections. So this individual asked, what is the argument against standardizing voting practices nationwide? And is there any effort underway to do so?
I'll take that one. As the representative of one of the 50 states, I think it's a balance. And I say that as a state's chief election officer who values the laboratory of democracy that states can be, to pilot things, to, every state has its own demographics, its own geography. Some is rural, some have more urban areas, and different, and where you have highly concentrated populations versus spread out populations. Different policies work, young populations, older populations, different electoral histories. And so I think there does need to be some accounting for variation and frankly, even perhaps independence in states, determining their best way of protecting access to the vote and security of the process, and recognizing that some of our best, if not a lot of our best ideas, automatic voter registration, online voter registration, that came from certain states, which then spread. So there's value in that. However, there's also a lot of value in the federal government setting standards and expectations that every state must meet. And I do believe the federal government has fallen down on that role in recent years, not just in their inaction over the reauthorization and extension or strengthening of the Voting Rights Act, but also the way in which there have been other needs for standards and some great legislation proposed that has gone nowhere simply because of politics. So I think moving forward, I'd like to see the federal government reclaim its role as the supportive funder and the supportive, expectation and standard setter for the states, with the balance of also allowing states to return to have their role as innovators and as administrators of the actual process.
Great. Commissioner, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I'm happy to add a little of that, because over the course of my career, I've both thought about this a lot and kind of spun around a few different ways on it. I will say, from my time on the Hill, federal election legislation does not move often. And so, you really, as Secretary Benson said, you've certainly seen a lot of innovation at the states. She mentioned online registration. That started in Arizona and then Washington, and now it's in 40 states. Colorado started risk limiting audits, and so you see some of these, again, the ability to pass federal legislation. I think federal legislation is very important, particularly for floors. There are those basic rights, those basic standards that we should have. And then, as Secretary Benson said, allow for that innovation. And certainly one of the things at the AC, we distribute grant funding, as many of you all know. Certainly, after the foreign interference of 2016, we've seen a lot of security grant money. We've distributed about $1.2 billion since FY18. But what we hear from election officials is about the need for a constant investment or an annual regular investment so they can plan. I think that is important. And I think a piece of that can certainly be something that encourages innovation. We've seen that in the past. It's really a great way for taxpayers, frankly, to get bang for their buck, where we've seen the AAC in the past provide grants to states. I mentioned risk limiting audits in Colorado, actually, that had HAVA money as at its origins. And so there are ways, for us to utilize the different ways, for positive improvement to the system, to be able to test that out. Again, we track a lot of this through the Election Administration and Voting Survey, so we have data to back this up. But again, I think that there is more that can be done.
Great. I don't know if Adam or Amanda, if you guys want to tackle that one at all. Okay. Adam, I actually wanted to ask you, I wanted to dig a little deeper into an answer you gave earlier to a scenario that Amanda raised, and that is if on election night, one of the candidates, either one, declares victory, and it is very clear that we actually don't know who the winner is. In terms of social media platforms and tech companies and their desire to make sure that people have all the information that they need, but as you said, voting will have stopped at that point. What do you think they will need to do if it is, for example, President Trump who is doing this? He is a president of the United States, but he is clearly spreading disinformation. Is this a scenario that they have actually thought about, and what do you think they should do?
I think it's probably a scenario that they've thought about. Whether or not they have decided on a course of action, I think that is appropriate is a different question. I think there's really two pieces of that. I think one is we need to recognize the unique status that a participant in an election, so if you're on the ballot, has in their ability to cast its outcome in doubt, regardless of what the facts, the votes, and other things may show. So just the kind of, by the act of rhetorically contesting an election, that can build a narrative that suggests it is if the media picks it up or others. And so I think that is certainly just something that needs to be kept in mind. And so I think there's really kind of two pieces to it. One is, if it is truly premature before we've gotten any sort of real numbers out or anything like that, that's just such a clear sign that needs to be, kind of action. And so platforms have, like Facebook and Twitter, have said that they will do varying degrees of labeling or even takedowns they've hinted at, although none of them have really ever done this in the electoral context. There has been some limited taking down of content from high profile world leaders around the COVID-19 disinformation. So it's certainly possible, but I think there's one space where it happens when the outcome is truly unknown. And that's, I think, one bucket. I think what's also really important to keep in mind is when the outcome is settled, when we think we have a very good sign, that attempts to then delegitimize that need to be treated even more harshly. So I think if somebody is a clear electoral vote victor and other things, and somebody is kind of continually spreading disinformation about that outcome, that's where an even heavier hand needs to be taken, because now it is just simply a tool being used to distribute the delegitimization of a process for the only goal of that. And so I think that is a place where you want to really, I think platforms need to be willing to be even harder in that space once something is settled than when it is unsettled. And certainly they should be mindful of both. But I think there's a danger both when we don't know the outcome, and there's a real danger when somebody knows the outcome and doesn't like it. And we need to treat them differently, but prepare for both outcomes.
Great, thank you. We are coming up to our close here, so I just want to do a quick round robin and just ask our panelists if there's any last thing that voters should know that we haven't touched on today. Any last thoughts that you'd like to leave? I'll start with Secretary Benson.
I think you're starting to hear a chorus of plan to vote, make a plan to vote, vote early, and then ensure you're spreading trusted information. And that's the bottom line. Know that we're in a state of heightened anxiety and heightened uncertainty. And so there's going to be this more than ever before desire to, I think, try to get on top of things and share information, especially as the polls close and into the days that follow. You're going to see, I heard this, or I heard that, or I've seen this, or this is happening. And really, I just encourage everyone to not spread not spread rumors, spread trusted information. And if you hear misinformation or things that don't sound right or things that sound bad, I know in Michigan, we've actually set up an email that you can send things to, like it's misinformation@michigan.gov. Check to see if your state officer or local clerk has done the same, but share the information with them, because that actually enables us to either validate it or invalidate it. And in Michigan, we've set up a website, michigan.gov/election security, that where we're posting the valid information and debunking the myths. So that is where I hope you go to get your information, to get your quote unquote news, as we all, anticipate the results together, and just know you're going to hear a lot more rumors based on rumor than facts if you don't do that.
Thank you, Secretary. Commissioner?
That's hard to follow up on because it's pretty great. I'd add, certainly the trusted info, again, is crucial this year. Also, we at DAC, we worked on a product with our partners at the Cybersecurity Infrastructure and Security Agency about the 3P voter, the voter that's prepared, that's participating, and that's patient. And I really think those are good things to keep in mind this year. And so, please do all of those things and certainly vote.
Thank you. Amanda?
Yeah, what everyone else said, just don't expect everything to be finished on election night. And if it's not, that's okay. That does not mean everything is rigged and people are being corrupt. And, again, if you are out at the polls that day and you do see voter intimidation or something that doesn't look right, if you're getting robocalls or anything like that, there are official channels you can reach out to. Also, I'm available. You can reach me on Twitter. Please send that. The media is going to be looking out for that. And it is harder to be out there during the pandemic, obviously. So, just if you are out there, just, keep an eye out for what's going on and try to alert the official channels.
Thank you. Adam?
I would just say get in that maybe habit now of if you're looking at social media when you're talking to friends and family, even if maybe you have a political disagreement, just think about some techniques to just highlight how to, kind of make sure that they're checking their facts or not spreading rumors, different things like that. Think about, that doesn't have to be about who you voted for or what you voted, but just, are you sure? Where did you see this? Hey, I heard this was wrong. Do you want to take it down? If you practice that now, if you start doing it now without necessarily focusing on who's winning or losing, but just about the information, it'll be better for all of us to get in that habit early. And vote.
Great. Yes, and vote. I want to thank everyone, our panelists, for joining us today. Thank you for taking time out of your very busy schedules to talk about this important topic. Thank you to all of our viewers. This event will be up on our website. Thank you again for joining us, and you can visit us at americanprogress.org.